When we want to understand the book of Isaiah, we need to first have a look at the background. And we see the heart of God is very grieved for what men do to men. And this starts, of course, in the book of Genesis when Cain killed his brother Abel and asked the famous question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And that question goes down through the history of the Old Testament. And we see empires rise, led by people like Nimrod. Book of Genesis in the King James Version mentions giants, and the better translation of that is that they were warrior-type people, soldiers, leaders of cities and eventually nations that oppressed people to fulfill their agendas and their personal visions. And slavery became the order of the day. And all of this, the way that mankind began to treat their neighbour, treat their brother, treat their sister, is really the background to the book of Isaiah. These are what we call the human empires, the human nations. And so this is really grieving the heart of God. In Isaiah we see nations like Syria, Israel itself, Assyria, Babylon, all of these are oppressing one another and their neighbours. And so Isaiah is about God's solution to this. It's about a new nation, a new kingdom that will be unlike all the other kingdoms and will be led by a king that is meek, the king that is humble in comparison to other kingdoms of the world. He's kind, and so he establishes a new kingdom that's of a very different nature. And we can see this concept, this announcement going through Isaiah, first about the birth of this king. He says that a virgin shall have a child in Isaiah chapter 7. And then in Isaiah chapter 9 it says, "To us a child is born, a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. And of the increase of his government and of peace there shall be no end." So here we see a little seed born just as a baby to start with, and the ministry of this child begins in Galilee. Isaiah says, "Galilee, the Gentiles, a great light has dawned and has been shown." And then from the ministry onwards, this new kingdom begins to expand and grow. Of the increase of this government of peace, there'll be no end. So this is expansion from this seed, from Israel out to the nations. Isaiah speaks about eventually all the Gentile nations coming into this kingdom. Eventually all nations coming into this kingdom. The abundance of the sea is converted to Christ, the sea meaning the Gentile nations. And so we can see these wonderful prophecies about the kingdom of Christ bringing transformation and changing the world. It even gets to the point, Isaiah says, where the lion and the wolf and the lamb lie down together. And so this is showing the peace of this empire, this kingdom, and how this peaceful kingdom transforms the nations and the whole world. It says that even nations beat their swords into plowshares. Their implements of war, they change into implements of peace, farming instruments. These are wonderful prophecies, especially in the light of the way the world is today. This is the promise of God. It's not just for us to be saved and to take into heaven, but it's for national, international transformation, so that instead of being like our Cain, our father Adam, we are like our new father, and we have Christ in us, Christ born in us. His government increases in our own heart, in our own lives, until our family, our community, our nation is transformed. So this is God's plan to transform the nations. He's not, as I said, just taking us to heaven, but he has a plan, and his desire is for a new world, a new earth. Some people think, well, this is fine, but it'll be after Jesus comes again. But that isn't what Isaiah is saying, I don't believe. He's talking about this transformation coming through the church before Christ comes. Christ will come at the pinnacle, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, when all enemies are placed under Christ's feet. That's when he returns at the final resurrection. So the wonderful thing is that God has a plan for his church. It's not a negative thing, but there's a wonderful hope, and there's a wonderful discipleship, that there's a wonderful involvement for us as the church in the world today to follow Christ and to believe for, to announce, to speak about this transformation and to see it come to pass by the grace of God. So this glory we see in Isaiah, this wonderful promises, that's not all we see in Isaiah. Running along with this glory is a parallel thread of suffering. We see the glory of the King Jesus, but we also see his humility, born as a baby. And this humility is something that bypasses the proud. This is God's will for his kingdom to be born and to expand through humility, so that the proud will be taken by their pride, so to speak. And this suffering is a part, and it's hard to understand everything about suffering and why. But the Bible says about Jesus, first of all, in Isaiah 53, that he was rejected, he was despised, and he was crucified, and he suffered. But it's not just Jesus. We hear a lot today about it being finished. It's finished, referring to the sufferings of Christ and his cross and his salvation, his redemption of mankind. It's true that redemption is finished, apart, the finished work of Christ. That is true. But in terms of suffering being finished, no, the church is still part of that. This revelation of suffering through Isaiah is not only for Christ, the head of the church, but it's for his body, it's for his people. We are identified with Christ. And so when you read Paul's epistles in the New Testament, you see that he says things like, that I might know him in the fellowship of his suffering, the power of his resurrection. In all of Paul's epistles, you see this identification with Christ in his full purpose, his full life, his full walk. And so we identify fully with Christ. And even though the church will suffer for Christ in the nations, God, through that suffering and through the gospel, through the power of the Spirit working in the church, will be fulfilling his promise to Abraham, that through Abraham's seed, he will bless all nations of the world. So our purpose, according to Isaiah, is transformation. And that happens as God's Spirit is working in the church and fulfilling God's promises. So it's a wonderful gospel and a wonderful kingdom. It's a wonderful plan that we are a part of today. God will transform all the nations through the church before Jesus comes.